Hello, and thank you for joining us for part two of our interview with Leazar and Christine Dima, co-leaders of Uduk Hope. My name is Emily Bachman, and I am one of the new board members with the organization. And this week, we're going to be talking about the foundations and development of the work that they're doing. So you both have had the chance to visit camps, refugee camps in the area. Can you talk a little bit about the purpose of those visits and the work that you did while you were there?
Sure, thanks, Emily. So I visited Doro Refugee Camp in South Sudan with Leazar and his mom in 2016 with the purpose of conducting needs assessment research in the camp. And the reason we wanted to go was because we found a previous research study that had been done, which outlined the needs in Doro Refugee Camp. However, we could read that on paper, but we wanted to go in person and talk to those who are living in the camps to hear their perceptions of that study. Would they agree with the needs that were outlined there? Would there be any things that they would add or clarify? And so it was really important that we actually went and saw the needs because Uduk Hope at the time we were just starting to figure out what things we would focus on as an organization. And so this research was very important. Another thing that we wanted to do was talk to the aid organizations as well as those working in the camps to see what efforts were they already doing, because what we didn't want to do was replicate any efforts. If there were already organizations doing something, we wanted to see how can we work alongside them. And so the ultimate goal of the trip in 2016 was to find the perfect place for Uduk Hope amidst all the needs and all the efforts already being done. And then Leazar went again to the camps. He went to the camps in Ethiopia. So we have one camp in South Sudan and 3 in Ethiopia, where he did the same type of study to ask those questions of those who are living there and also to learn more from the organizations. The study, I designed it as part of my final project for my master's thesis, which I was working on around the time of 2016. We did our first trip to the camps, and the way I designed it was first starting with the looking at the literature, looking at the previous studies that had been done, and then setting up questions through focus groups. So we decided to do focus groups with different demographics. So we had a focus group with older men in the camps, a focus group with older women, younger women. We did it that way. And then for those who are leaders of organizations, we talked to them through interviews. So basically the study was organized in that way. And I think it was a really helpful way to get a lot of information in a short amount of time.
Yeah, that's great. It's always helpful to do that kind of background when you're getting work done. So if you can tell us now a little bit about the role of faith in the church in the life and history of the Kwanimpa people, that would be great.
So American missionaries first went to the Sudan around the 1950s. And since then, their work of bringing the gospel to the people there, baptizing people, translating Bibles into all of the languages in those regions, now has made it so that the Uduk people have become Christians since the 1950s, and there are countless churches historically in the different villages of the Uduk or the Kwanimpa people. And so because of that, the church has a big and very important role in today's Kwanimpa society because the majority of the population attends Sunday service, celebrates Christmas and Easter. It's a very normal part of life, something that people are excited about. Furthermore, because there's so many people engaged in missions through the church, going to other churches within Sudan, baptizing other people groups nearby, things like that, because it's such a normalized part of life. People have really gotten used to calling themselves Christians, which before 1950 wasn't a thing at all. And so to this day, the church is continuing to grow there. In Doro Camp, we serve 19 churches. That's 19 congregations, thousands of people in just one camp. In the Ethiopian camps, there are three churches that we serve, one in each of the three camps, one in Shirkole, one in Ore, and then one in Tongo camp. And so what we do through Uduk Hope from America here goes through the church there and through the local teams. A part of the success of Christine's research design is the fact that we're able to partner with organizations that are there. We're able to partner with churches, and we're able to partner with local groups that all focus on supporting their own community, trying to improve their lives given the needs that people face. And the church is at the center of that.
So you've touched on this a little bit and we're just now a little bit, but if you can talk about where you see Uduk Hope fitting into the larger picture of work in the area. What are some of the pressing or unique needs that Uduk Hope is seeking to address there?
So hunger is a really, really big one in South Sudan, particularly because it's a new country. And they've had their civil war as soon as the country became independent. That caused a lot of damage to the landscape and a lot of people to flee from their homes. So no one owns a farm. And because of that, it's really hard to get food. And a lot of the country of South Sudan are not refugees because they're in their own country. And so there's no aid organization coming to distribute resources like food, oil, soap to the general population. And then where the whole country has been put under a hunger crisis for a very long time, the refugee population within that country suffers even more with hunger, lack of clothing, education gaps, and things like that. So hunger is really big. Education is where Uduk Hope is going to be focusing on in the future. It's the direction that we believe is going to bring the most change in. And so what we're doing is providing food and school programs for kids so that they have incentive to go to schools. Because there's hunger, that means that there's no food in their homes for them to eat. But if they hear that there's food in the schools, they will go to school and stay there all day for the meal. But at the same time, they're getting the education that they need. In other areas of education, we're helping to provide scholarships for high school age students and also for college students to go to college in nearby cities now, because we're in a time of COVID-19. It has reached the area of Sudan. In South Sudan, people are now restricted from movement. So the education field is going to look a little bit different, but it's still the same goal of furthering education and opening opportunities for the future.
And I will just add, as Liasser was saying, this is going back to our research study where we saw, for example, that hunger was a huge need. But we knew as a small organization that had started in Rochester, New York, that we would not be able to feed 80,000 people and provide meals. We didn't have that capacity. And there were already organizations doing that in the camp. But where we saw the opening was that, as you mentioned, in the schools, that's something we can do. It was more attainable and something we could raise funds for. So it was really finding that particular area where we saw a need, but we also had the capacity to help out. And so that's where the Food in the School program started, which also ties into education, and scholarships are something that we can easily raise funds for and identify participating universities or high schools, private high schools that students could go to. Another place where we saw a need and also an opportunity where we could support was in helping to generate income, looking at income generating activities. And so that looks like supporting the churches. Lias already mentioned that there are 19 churches in Dora refugee camp in South Sudan and 3 in the camps in Ethiopia, looking into how we could help fund those churches to do the great work that they're already doing, but provide them with assistance from here. And then also looking further from that, if for whatever reason, Uduk Hope is not able to raise funds, if we're able to create a structure in which those in the camps themselves are able to raise funds through local ventures, then that can fund all the things we talked about, the food in the schools, that can help fund scholarships, that can help support the churches. So after we saw those areas, we also looked into how can we help to start other activities such as small businesses or things, so that if we're not able to raise funds one day, we can still support in these ways.
Yeah, so these are all different important areas. And you talked about kind of the initiatives now and structures. How do you actually go about, or how did you actually go about setting up the hands and feet, so to speak, to get these things in place and to stay in place when you're not there? And how are these site leaders trained?
That's a great question. That was one of the biggest questions we had. So if we go and we do studies, and if we try to visit on a regular basis, how do we set up a presence that's regular, that can monitor and have a feedback loop, so that while we're here in Rochester, New York, and all the other locations where our board members are, we can still be connected to what's happening in the 4 refugee camps. And so what we did was we developed on-site teams. They're called our Uduk teams. And we have 1 team each of the refugee camps. So we have 4 camps in total, so 4 teams. And so when we were in each of the camps, we made it a goal to set up these teams while we were there. And basically, we asked the church leadership for people they saw who had strong skills in organization and record keeping, and who were passionate about the community, and who were leaders in their community already. Some people already rose up as leaders while we were there. They came over while we were doing research and said, I really want to help out. What can I do? And they were natural fits to be a part of this team we were developing. And others were nominated by community leaders, or especially in the church. And it's important to note that a senior pastor is also a member of each of the teams to help with that spiritual oversight, since there is a strong connection to the church in each of the camps and in the community. Another thing that was really important to us was gender parity. We really wanted to have representation from both men and women. And so each team has 4 men and 4 women, and they can decide to serve for however long they feel that they're capable. And if anyone has to step away, then there's a process of reaching out to the leadership, especially in the church, and seeing who else would like to step up and take on that role. So as far as communication, while Yasser was there, he trained the teams in each of the camps in record keeping and in communication, in ways to relay information, how to verify that information that you have is factual, and to make sure that it's relayed in a timely manner. And so he has regular calls with the teams to check in to see, how are things going based on this program and the funds we raised, how are they used, and were there any setbacks? And so that has created that feedback loop. And then another question surrounds language. Yasser, being a speaker of both English and Twampa, which is the Uduk or the Kwanipa language, that's been really helpful. Lots of the members of our team speak English, but in some areas they may feel more comfortable speaking in Twampa about a particular topic. And so having Yasser as someone to facilitate that communication has been really helpful, so he can report back to our board members and have that loop continue in that way.
Yeah, so you pretty well answered this question, but just to add a little clarification, how do you maintain accountability with the teams, and what does that look like? You mentioned the board a little bit, some things like that.
Yeah, so we have a board of directors here in the States, and amongst our roles of things that we do is raise funds, and we program plan and talk to our local teams on the ground over there. Now the church has taken, the local churches in each of the camps has taken a big role in directly managing the local teams, meaning if anything goes wrong, the churches there will say, okay, this is our mistake, this is how we're gonna fix it. But in terms of the projects and how they run, when they receive the funding for something specific, that they keep the records and they report it directly to me, either through email or a phone call. or through Facebook, and any means of communication that is up and working from a refugee camp at that time, they will do that. And then we say, okay, thank you for this information. We'll get back to you on what we're going to do next as a team. And then the other piece is when each of the community members themselves see a need that we didn't see before. And this happens often. They will reach out and say, here's a new need in the community. Can we do something about this? Can we raise funds for this? Does this fit with our 3 pillars of education, faith, and community development? If it does, then we go through our process of, is this something that we can raise funds for here, or is there something more pressing? Trying to determine for our long-term vision of building self-sustained communities that are not so much affected by war anymore, but people who can take control of their own futures. Will that project in the long term work for that benefit, or is it just something nice that has nothing to do with the future plan? So we try to stick to our long-term vision and see if it fits, and then we take into consideration the funding, but the information flow between the local teams and from our board directors here, matters a lot in our accountability to each other, but also to the organization.
Yeah, and I'll just add, just along the lines of what you were saying, that it's the board, there's a balance between the board overseeing the activities that are done in the camp, but also receiving information and allowing those in the camps to really own what they believe is best. And so the organization started with trying to get ideas and input from those who are in the camps and letting us know, what is the best way for us to support you, but setting that up and then also holding each other accountable, and that, for those on the ground, you've told us that these are the areas where we can support. So as an accountability partner here in the US as our board, we want to really try to look through and vet different things that are brought up and maybe outside of where we were originally focusing. And sometimes that brings up the opportunity for new areas, and other times it's an opportunity to refocus. And so I think it's a balance between one another of hearing about new needs, and maybe this helps us refine our vision or evolve our vision. In other ways, it may be a time to say, oh, let's actually go back to these areas. So it's a conversation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you so much for joining us for part 2. We appreciate you all answering so many questions of ours. If there are any specific needs that you'd like to learn more about, we would encourage you to email us at udukhope@gmail.com, and we look forward to seeing you for part 3 of our interview.